Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your eye-opener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. For centuries, the image of the family farmer has been as iconic a piece of Americana as baseball and apple pie. Rugged and independent, the farmer still represents in the minds of many those true ideals of American individualism that the country was based on, with Thomas Jefferson's ideal of the yeoman farmer providing for him the ideal citizen for the fledgling American Republic. Even now, after the virtual extinction of the family farm model in the corporate agri-business paradigm, long after the American population shifted from predominantly rural and agrarian to predominantly urban and corporate, there is still the ideal of the farmer, dedicated to a life of hard, honest work, growing the food upon which we all rely. What an indictment of modern-day America, then, that it sits by while a federal agency appoints itself over the remaining few organic family farmers, presuming to come between those farmers and their customers, telling people what they can and cannot eat, and even raiding farms that dare to resist, with guns drawn.
Welcome to America.
Federal agents and fully armed local police teamed up for a major raid in Venice, California, but it wasn't drugs they were looking for.
What they proceeded to do was take about 800 gallons of raw milk and pour it down the kitchen sink.
This week's raid is the latest battle between Rawson Foods, an organic food co-op, and health officials. The Food and Drug Administration says that they are protecting people from the health risks of drinking unpasteurized milk. But members of Rawson sign a waiver saying they'll take that risk.
Raw milk doesn't have lactose intolerance, it doesn't have allergies, where pasteurized milk has lots of lactose intolerance and lots of allergies.
Despite that, the operator, James Stewart, and two others were arrested and are facing several charges, including conspiracy and processing milk without pasteurization.
Although the recent Rawson Foods raids have garnered national and even international attention for their senseless violence and the in-your-face nature of the armed FDA operation, these raids were by no means the first such raids conducted by the FDA in the name of keeping the world safe from raw milk. In 2006, police officers and agricultural officials involved in a sting operation arrested Gary and Don Oakes of 00 Farms on suspicion of selling raw milk. Some of the shareholders in the Oakes cow share program were physically restrained at the scene, kept from retrieving the milk from their own cows, and repeatedly told to shut up and stay out of the way while officers browbeat Gary, who was later sent to hospital. In 2008, 6 Pennsylvania state troopers and a Pennsylvania DOA official trespassed onto the farm of Mark Nolt, a Wenger Mennonite dairyman, confiscating over $20,000 worth of his products and equipment and forcibly arresting Mr. Nolt for selling raw milk without a license. In 2010, Bloomington raw milk consumer Ray Lynn Sandvig had her home raided by police and was threatened with prosecution by the Minnesota DOA for acting as a distribution point for raw milk from a local farmer. Many other such incidents continue to take place across the United States, often in localities like California, where the sale of raw milk is perfectly legal. Ostensibly, these crackdowns are being done in the name of safety. Raw foods, after all, can be dangerous, and pasteurization is touted as one of the great triumphs of modern food safety processes. Recent research and data, however, are challenging long-held beliefs about the benefits of pasteurization, and a vigorous debate is currently underway in the medical profession over the safety and benefits of raw, organic dairy products.
Many people watching this video will be familiar with the benefits of raw food, but my guess is it's probably accurate to state that the vast majority of people in the United States are concerned about the safety of raw food. So absolutely. I'm wondering if you could comment on the history of raw food and perhaps clear up some of the confusion that many of those who are uninformed about this and somewhat skeptical about the benefits and really concerned about the safety.
Well, the benefits are kind of a separate issue from the safety.
Sure.
But the safety is a very legitimate question. There's no question. There are two kinds of raw milk in America, and there's always been, for the last 200 years at least, two kinds of raw milk in America. And the beginnings of the raw milk issue
and you say 200 years because prior to 200 years there was, all milk was raw.
Yeah.
So,
well, actually, pasteurization began around 1893 or so, with parboiling starting. But it was interesting because in the late 1700s, early 1800s, people started moving to the cities. And when they went to move to the cities, they brought their cows and their goats with them. And that worked out okay until the Boston Commons got ate down to nothing. It became a muddy mess. And then in 1812, there was a kind of a blockade against Jamaica. We couldn't get rum in the United States, and we wanted our rum. And so these brewery, distillery dairies started to pop up in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. And distillers' grains were being fed to these cows that had been brought into the city with the city dwellers. And it was a cheap feed, and the cows would produce milk. But the problem was, cows had never eaten distillers' swill and became
Which is
sick.
mostly grain.
Yeah, grain, thank you. It changed their gut physiology. Didn't have flushing toilets, no hot water, no chlorines, no flushing toilets. The people that were milking the cows were milking the cows by hand, and they were newcomers through Ellis Island and were not the rich and the healthy, but the poor and the sick. And they were carrying tuberculosis, brucellosis, typhoid was rampant. On a cold morning, people would put their feet in the milk to keep them warm when they were milking the cow. Filthy conditions. These conditions were ripe for some kind of a solution. And in
It's a public health menace.
it was terrible. 50% of the people that drank this swill milk died. It was a torment. In fact, it was called the milk problem at the time. And historians lament about this horrible problem, about this swill milk. And so 1893, a guy by the name of Coit developed the other milk, the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions, the certified milk, and determined that doctors should prescribe raw milk that comes from clean dairies, grass-fed, sunshine dairies with sanitary practices and low bacteria counts. And that milk was best for babies because it was a mirror image of breast milk. And children thrived on breast milk. So you had two kinds of raw milk in America, and it was a disaster of the really filthy milk in the 1880s that caused this kind of divergence of the two kinds of raw milk. Because raw milk intended for human consumption and clean has always been there for 30,000 years, but had a real disaster for 150 years or so as industrialization and accumulation of civilians in a small, citizens in a small area, and cows not eating the right proper foods kind of caused this disaster. So pasteurization kind of helped this disaster get better, but still had a lot of problems until the 1920s when they could actually figure out what pasteurization was all about. But then you had two kinds of milk. You had pasteurized milk, which came from many dairies put together, and that was rendered, quote, safe by heating. And then you had clean raw milk, which is a local food, which has always been safe when it was raised in grass pastures, and one farmer took complete responsibility for it.
This is what the FDA has to say about it. Raw milk should not be consumed by anyone at any time for any reason. Now, why would the FDA say that? Why would the CDC say the same thing? Raw milk can carry harmful bacteria and other germs that can make you very sick or kill you. While it is possible to get foodborne illnesses from many different foods, raw milk is one of the riskiest of all. This is what happened, why pasteurization was brought into use in milk. It is one of the great triumphs of public health in this century. This was the problem that existed. This was a FDA poster from the Work Product Administration in the 30s, bringing about a problem, exercising an issue about the dangers of raw milk. Now, raw milk is still a problem. Now, one of the reasons that it is not a bigger problem, as Mr. Gumpert suggested, is because so few people drink it. Why do so few people drink it? Is because pasteurization has worked so well.
Okay, well, you see the two men in the top left. They were victims of eating cantaloupe with listeria, and they were in the hospital for 2 months. And after they came out, they're still on oxygen. They're going to likely have permanent disabilities. The woman on the lower left died from the cantaloupe she had, and the woman on the right is the widow of a man who died. His photo wasn't available. But in total, the cantaloupe contaminated with listeria killed 32 people and sickened 113, and some with lasting problems like those men at the top. Same thing with bad ground beef and a hamburger. Paralyzed this woman on the left, promising young dancer by the name of Stephanie Smith. The little girl in the middle spent several weeks on dialysis. The 2-year-old boy on the right, he died. And both of these cases were from contaminated raw spinach. Now, I haven't heard anyone suggest that we ban hamburgers, spinach, cantaloupes, or even limit their availability. But any number of common foods that we take for granted can and do kill people. Eggs, peanut butter, luncheon meats, even pasteurized milk killed 3 people here in Massachusetts as recently as 2007. Yet there hasn't been a single death from raw milk since at least the 1980s. Now, I went through this little exercise because it's typical of the kind of fear-mongering our opponents do about raw milk. None of it, whether about cantaloupe, or hamburgers, or raw spinach, or peanut butter, or raw milk, proves anything about what's happening in the big picture. When you look at the macro data, you find it's not nearly as scary as you would expect.
Whatever side of this argument any individual comes down on in the scientific debate, the policy and law that comes out of that debate has to be seen in the larger societal and historical context. If farmers have enjoyed the freedom to grow and process their foods as they see fit for centuries, and customers likewise have enjoyed the freedom to purchase those foods from those producers they personally trust, how and why did the FDA gain the authority to interfere in that process? By what jurisdiction does a federal regulator gain the authority to legislate what foods people are allowed to put into their own bodies? The legal argument for FDA jurisdiction in these cases is the Interstate Commerce Clause, that part of Article 1 of the Constitution which gives Congress authority over commerce that crosses state lines. In this case, any food product that crosses state boundaries can be said to come under federal jurisdiction, and with this foot in the door, the FDA has argued that it is within their mandate to terrorize family farms, raid them at gunpoint, dump their milk and spoil their produce, and arrest the farmers. Some on Capitol Hill have attempted to stop this legislative tyranny with counter-legislation that would remove this authority from the FDA altogether.
I never cease to wonder about what this government does. All of a sudden, you know, the government intervenes and said, you can't sell milk across a state line. And I thought, this is preposterous. And even though it's a small number compared to the many millions of people, it's a very important freedom message for me, that people have a right to buy and sell milk across the state border.
Good, excellent. So this bill actually simply permits what would be normal behavior for the FDA.
What we do is we legalize the Constitution on this. You know, it should have gone without saying. I'm sure when the Constitution was written, the founders never thought for a minute that if you happen to live on a state border, you couldn't sell farm products across the state, including milk. Besides, most people drank raw milk back then anyway, so it was assumed that you could do this. But the Interstate Commerce Clause was an important clause they put in the Constitution because they wanted a free trade zone. They wanted the 13 colonies so that people could move goods and services and people back and forth and make it one country in that sense, but retaining the sovereignty of each state. So the Commerce Clause was to break down barriers, to make sure that one state wouldn't prohibit the importation of raw milk. So they turned the Constitution on its head. The government comes in and says, oh, we have the right to regulate commerce. But
that's to make it regular. That's to make it regular. That's not to prohibit, to license and
yeah,
tax.
that's right. They prohibit it. And so therefore, it sounds facetious, but it's absolutely true. We're just trying to legalize our freedoms that were natural to us and given to us and guaranteed in the Constitution. But I guess we have to fight every single battle. But I see it in the context of total freedom. People should have freedom of choice, whether they're in one state versus the other, what they do with their lives, what they do with their money, and what they do with their bodies.
But reducing the scope of the Interstate Commerce Clause is an indirect way at best of countering the tyranny inherent in this bureaucratic legislative assault on food freedom. Many people will judge this debate not on the merits of the scientific arguments, or on the principle of freedom of choice by which individuals are naturally invested with the right to choose what food they do or do not eat, but by the question of food safety that the FDA uses to frame their involvement in the debate. This safety is akin to that of the TSA's airport safety. In the name of providing that mythical state of safety which will supposedly keep our skies free of terrorists and our plate clear of potential hazards, the federal government proposes an all-encompassing, all-pervasive, inescapable bureaucracy with the power to pat down old ladies in wheelchairs and young children alike, or to conduct guns-blazing raids on family farms and private food clubs where voluntary exchanges happen between customers and producers, or even to shut down children's lemonade stands in state after state because the proprietors don't have the proper license to conduct business. Even if we were to accept the premise that pasteurized milk was in each and every case empirically healthier for each and every individual, and that raw milk was invariably inferior or even potentially harmful, by what right does the federal government come between the people and their dinner plate? If the government is invested with the power of watching over every individual's diet, then why not the mandated eating of broccoli? Why not the banning of ice cream? Why not the outlawing of sugar in favor of aspartame or NutraSweet or AminoSweet or whatever label its corporate manufacturer is assigning this week in an attempt to dupe an unwitting public? Once again, we see that the operative principle of freedom is the only guarantee from systemic harm. If the supposedly all-loving nanny government comes in with such mandates and those mandates prove to be wrong or harmful, then every single man, woman, and child in the country has to choose between eating the government-prescribed foods or being an outlaw in the pursuit of a healthy alternative. If the public is granted freedom, however, then no one will be forced into any behavior that they find unacceptable. Those who believe in the unerring efficacy of pasteurization can happily feed that to their family, just as those who seek organic dairy alternatives would be able to purchase that free from harassment. Such a system does not guarantee that mythical ideal of total safety, but it does guarantee that no wrong decision is hardwired into society and that no one is imprisoned for eating the wrong foods. And in the end, who can argue with freedom of choice? This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.